Good evening, everyone. I'm Robert Doar, the president of AEI, and I'm very honored to be joined today and having all of you join with me today in this conversation with the fifth president of Georgia, Salome Zourabichvili. For those of you who are visiting for the first time, like President Bishvili, I want to say something about AEI, and then I want to turn it over to you for your remarks. The American Enterprise Institute believes in freedom, and it believes in independence for nations facing bullies in the world. And we stand for that strongly in our scholarship and our work, and Dalibor is one of the leaders of that. So is Corey Shockey, the head of our foreign and defense team. And it's really part of who we are. And when we were out before, in the library before we came in with the president, I was showing her the painting of General Marshall that we have in our library, and that's very intentional. We want our visitors to know that we believe in efforts on the part of America to support freedom and democracy in Europe and around the world. And so we're very proud to have you, Madam President, with us today to give us your perspective on what it's like to be on the front lines of the battle for freedom and independence. And we want you to know that while AEI doesn't take institutional positions and is nonpartisan, we're on your side. And so I want to welcome you and ask you to take the floor, Madam President. Thank you.
I'm very honored to be here and to have the chance to talk to you about the country that I represent here, that I'm very glad to have been representing at the inauguration ceremony, because I think that it's important that Georgia be kept on your mind at this very time when Georgia is going through a very difficult moment, one that is existential moment, and that's what explains the mobilization of the population for now more than 2 months. It's a time that is crucial for Georgia, but I think that it's also a moment that is important for the United States and for the decisions that the new administration is going to have to take when looking at the outside world. And I've listened very carefully to the speeches, because I attended both speech of the president, and I was struck by his conviction about building a strong America. And I think that what Georgians are looking at when looking at Washington is exactly that, that where we are, when we are confronted to challenges not only to democracy, but challenges to the independence and challenges to the Euro-Atlantic future of our country, we are looking to a strong America that can show and tell our northern neighbor that the Caucasus, that Georgia, that this region, which is one that is quite strategic, is not a region to be taken over, to be again put under Russian domination. If that were to happen, and if America were not to resist to this attempt of a weak Russia to reimpose its domination, that would mean a weak America. So I don't think that we are going in that direction. And we, the Georgian people, as they are showing, are ready, as they have been all along their history of some 20 more centuries, ready to defend their freedom and independence. And they go to the streets and they go to defend themselves when they think that their existence, their independence is at stake. And that's what's happening today. Today we have in the country a government that is not only not legitimate because it's issued from rigged elections to which Russians have been really taking their share of influencing and creating these mechanisms and very sophisticated, I would say, operation of stealing the elections, but also because the government issued from these, the parliament and government issued from these elections took a stand on 28th of November, which told the Georgian population that they were turning their back on their partners, on Europe and the United States, and turning towards Russia. And that's what really started the very large movement that we have been seeing developing over the past 2 months, and that will continue. While the government is now turned in itself, has been isolated from its own population, and has been not recognized by any of our major partners, we are in a standoff, in a dead end. An isolated government closed in behind closed doors, and a population on the streets that is not ready to accept this departure of the orientation that had been followed by 80% of the population for the past 30 years. The reason why we were fighting with our US and European partners in Afghanistan or in Iraq was this determination to join the community of free nations. And that is something that is very dear to the Georgian population, and that for which they're going to continue to defend themselves without any doubt. So that's the general picture, and for the rest, I'm ready for the discussion and the questions. Thank you very much.
Madam President, it's again a great honor to have you here at the EI, and thank you again for this tour d'horizon. Again, my name is Dalibor Rohac. I'm a fellow here at the EI, and I'm AEI's resident Eastern European, so to speak, somebody who is committed to again freedom, independence, and a prosperous future for countries of Central and Eastern Europe, and that includes Georgia. Before I ask you a few follow-up questions, I want to remind, in particular, our online audience that you can already start asking questions online by emailing them to my colleague Joe Saylor at joesaylor@aei.org, or you can also ask them on Twitter using the hashtag Georgian Democracy AEI. Now, to start this conversation on a somewhat personal note, we have no particular reason to remember me, but we met very briefly last September when I had the honor to visit the Orbeliani Palace alongside participants of an international conference that was then being held in Tbilisi, and I had also the chance to have a very brief conversation with you in my broken French, and I asked you about the prospect of Georgia going the way of Belarus, with a stolen election, which was already kind of looming on the horizon, followed by a crackdown on protests. And I remember very vividly you telling me that that was not going to happen because, I quote, Georgia was not Belarus. Well, last week, there was a former prime minister of Georgia that was almost beaten to death by thugs, presumably hired by somebody close to Georgian Dream. Just this week, Pridon Bubuteishvili, a 20-year-old, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for participating in last year's protests against the Russian-style foreign agents law. So was your assessment perhaps too optimistic? Is maybe Georgia moving on the continuum closer to a Belarusian scenario?
I don't know. My assessment was not optimistic if we're talking about the society, because I think that we have in Georgia a very different society from that one that you have in Belarus. And what we have been seeing over the past 2 months is a very responsible, organized, and peaceful movement of the civil society that is not going to stop. On the other side, you're right that the reaction and the repression that is led by the Georgian dream is very similar to the methods that have been used by Putin in Russia, by the Belarus leaders. It's a methodology that is very similar everywhere when you have these Russian regimes that are put into place. But I don't think that the outcome is going to be the same, because I don't think that today the government is very isolated, is really not having any policy but that of repression, which does not really get any effective results, and they don't have any policy. Their only policy is to announce that they're going to sentence, to repress, to arrest, and to bring to judgment the old United National Movement, which is quite strange as a policy statement of a new, in principle, new parliament, new government after their elections. So it's a very paralyzed government that we have, not one that is confident. And the other thing is that Georgia is a small country where when you are isolated, when you're not recognized by any of your major partners, when you cannot really count on any form of direct support of those that you are courting, China or Iran or Russia in itself, there is nothing much left. We are entering now an economic crisis because tourism has dropped, a financial crisis, and they have no resources.
You described the current situation in the opening remarks as a dead end, a government that's isolated, that's not being recognized abroad, that's not seen as legitimate by a large part of the Georgian population. You have people in the streets. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, what do you see as a way out of this current situation? And maybe one way of getting at that would be to sort of present you what could be a sort of contrarian view of the situation that I've been hearing from some people. So the contrarian view goes like this. Yes, Georgian dream is terrible, and there has been fraud involved in the election. At the same time, fraud probably doesn't explain the full margin with the Georgian dream won the election. The opposition was pretty ineffective, didn't campaign properly. Even the OSCE has stopped short of declaring the election completely illegitimate. Wouldn't it be better for the opposition to simply take their seats in the legislature and to play along in this rigged game dominated by Georgian dream, and perhaps hoping to make some advances and set themselves better for success in the upcoming election? What's the alternative if this scenario is?
That's a misreading of the situation. The situation in Georgia is not a political crisis between two parts of Georgia, one that would have won, rigging a little bit or more or less the elections, and the other part. That was the case maybe right after the elections, although we have seen and we see more and more the dimension of the Russian operation of rigging the elections that many European countries would be well advised to reflect upon and to understand better, because it's something that was on the verge of happening in Romania, could happen in Moldova, can still happen in the next Romanian elections. So it's a serious issue for all European countries when looking at the future of elections, where we see more and more Russia using this non-costly instrument of intervention in the countries. But more than that, the question that we have in Georgia is the question of a non-legitimate government, not elected properly, that takes non-constitutional decisions. The meeting of the parliament under violation of constitutional principles, and then takes a decision for which it has no mandate of the country, which is to take Georgia away from its Euro-Atlantic path, which is set in the constitution and which has received the support of 80% of the population non-stop from practically the day of independence. And that is what really started the massive movement. There were 3 episodes of massive protest in Georgia. One was the first Russian law, the second was the second Russian law, and the third was not that much after the elections, but after the decision of 28th of November, when the prime minister, without any mandate, says, I'm going to get rid of the constitution, I'm not going to follow, and I suspend the path of Georgia towards Europe. And that means for the whole of Georgia, taking Georgia back under Russian domination. And that is something that the Georgian population has never and will never accept. So it has nothing to do with political parties, with them uniting, not uniting, planning well or not well their campaign. It's an existential issue, and that is something that everybody that knows Georgia understands very well, that never has this country accepted to be submitted to such domination, and that's why this country has survived over the centuries and is still there and will still be there for the future to come.
To change gears a little bit, you spent now almost a week in Washington at the invitation of Congressman Wilson, who's a friend of AEI, stalwart defender of Georgian democracy. During that week, you attended the inauguration. Alongside other festivities in town, you met with the new Secretary of State. I saw you with the noted American intellectual Donald Trump Jr. as well. Presumably, you were making the case to them for why Georgia matters to the United States. And given the ideological center of gravity of the new administration, I assume that that argument must have been different from the traditional case, which was built around the rules-based international order, around questions of democracy, questions of shared Western and European values. So what sort of arguments were you kind of presenting to people who might be thinking in more transactional terms than perhaps we've taken for granted in the past?
The interest of America and especially of an America that wants to be strong on the international scene. The interests of America in Georgia and in that region are very clear from the fact that the United States has been constantly, since the independence, supporting the Georgian state, to the point that we are one of the main per capita beneficiaries of American aid. And that is probably not only because of sympathy to Georgia, but because there were serious long-term American interests, and they exist in that region. And I don't think, and that was my message to the new administration, I don't think that the new administration can project the image of a strong America and at the same time defer to Russia, to a weak Russia, in a region that is strategically important, because that's the Caucasus, that is the Black Sea, and Russia is very clearly targeting the Black Sea. The manipulation of elections happened in Georgia, in Romania, in Moldova. So it's not, one doesn't have to be very shrewd to see that there is a whole strategy of taking over. And Ukraine, of course, taking over the Black Sea and making it a Russian closed sea. And that's also the opening to Central Asia. So there are very major interest in that region. Armenia has been turning towards the West, has signed a strategic partnership with the United States. Azerbaijan was, with its partnership with Turkey, also moving away from the Russian monopoly of domination. And Central Asian republics are also gradually trying to distance themselves from both China and Russia and try to find direct ways to the West. So that the time has come for America to show that they are not going to accept to see Russia trying to reinvest this whole region and to push away both Europeans and Americans from that region. If one wants a demonstration of strength, that's where, and political strength, because there it's not a question of arms and of conflict.
I think it is fair to say that there was a degree of frustration among freedom and democracy loving Georgians with the previous administration and its approach to Georgia, which I think is fair to say at the political level, the ball has been kind of dropped on Georgia. The file was delegated to State Department bureaucrats out of sight of kind of real political decision makers. How confident are you that the new team will represent an improvement over the status quo, and that indeed your arguments really sort of fell on ears that were not completely deaf? And I'm saying that in the light of the fact that there is one important interlocutor in Europe who seems to have the ear of many people in the administration, and that is Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban is also somebody who was in Tbilisi right after the election, eager to sort of provide a boost of legitimacy, if you will, to the Georgian Dream government. So
the very next morning, without having the results of the...
Indeed. So how, what is your expectation and what is your kind of argument to your American partners for why Viktor Orban is completely wrong and they shouldn't listen to him on matters?
I don't discuss Viktor Orban with American partners. I don't think that Viktor Orban is relevant, and Europe is not Viktor Orban. Clearly, there are other major partners in Europe. One is is Poland. The other one is France. The Baltic states that are also very listened by the administration. So I don't think that Orban is the one that dominates this. And I think that it's not a question of who talks and who listens to whom. It's the facts and the reality on the ground. So on the ground, the choice is there whether to let Russia, weak Russia again, because a Russia that has not been able to win over 3 years the war in Ukraine and has lost many of its objectives, whether to let Russia have a revenge in the region of the Caucasus and in Georgia, which has been the stronghold of democracy and American interest in the region for so long. That's a question, and that's a challenge for the administration. So it's not a question of who convinces whom. It's a question of looking at the facts and at the reality. So I'm confident that reality will impose itself.
So let's assume that's indeed the case, and that everybody that you talk to listen carefully and will act accordingly. And so I want to ask you,
I want to be precise. It's not a question of my messages are there, but I've not had time, neither did they have the time to listen to my demonstrations. I think that the reality is going to confront this administration, and that this administration that wants a very strong America in the world scene is going to see very clearly where are the interests of America in that region.
So what do you think would be the sort of top 3 policies that would be sort of corollaries of the recognition of America's proper interest in the region, and that would also, I assume, strengthen the prospects for Georgia's democracy and independence? If you sort of could come up with a sort of wish list of 3 policies that you believe would
I don't think that I'm going not to define now the policies that the American administration should follow. I think that it's a question of engagement and of political statement that America is in this region, has been supporting Georgian state for 30 years has been really creating and training and consolidating our army for 30 years and all our institutions, and that America will continue standing by Georgia and by a region of the Caucasus that has to remain independent. It's not a question of concrete politics. And to come back to the former remarks that you made on the previous administration, yes, there was a lack of engagement, which maybe has encouraged Russia to be more proactive in the region and try to push this proxy regime to turn more and more pro-Russian. Because frankly, there has not been an engagement of the previous administration. There was no high-level visit in Georgia. Secretary Blinken has never visited Georgia while he was in the region all over the place. And there was no high-level visit from Georgian leaders, and including the president, to Washington during my 6 years, the terms of my mandate. So I think there was a lack of engagement, and maybe that was misinterpreted by Russia. For in the relationship with Russia, it's very important not to let Russia second guess what might be the interest, what might be the engagement. So it's a political rapport de force.
So again, it's fair to say that Georgia has ample experience with Russian interference, Russian military
aggressions,
and military occupation, going back to the 1990s and
going back to the 800s,
indeed,
1800s.
Indeed, and for that reason, and very understandably, the hope of achieving NATO membership for Georgia has been, one of the cornerstones for sort of democratically minded Georgians. Is a sort of very important goal, and it is NATO membership that protects Poland, Baltic states against Russian aggression, and it is the absence of NATO membership that invited Russian aggression against Ukraine. Now, with the current administration, and indeed even with the former one, and with voices in Europe such as Chancellor Scholz, it looks like prospects for real enlargements of the alliance in the years to come are weak at best. So what would
You're
be?
very pessimistic today.
I'm an Eastern European. I can't help it being gloomy.
Chancellor Scholz is leaving.
Good. Well, let's hope that's all it takes to change the NATO conversation. So assuming everything goes well in Georgia, Georgian people retake their country, so to speak. Georgian dream is gone. There will be still this long-term challenge of securing the country against further Russian interference, aggression, occupation.
Yeah, I think that the best prospect is that we have a very weak Russia, and that Russia is going to get weaker, even if there is a settlement in the conflict after the aggression against Ukraine. Russia will be weakened by the return of the soldiers, by the return of the dead soldiers. Russia is not prepared for any of the social consequences of the after conflict. It is already weak when you use North Koreans to fight your war. It's a sign of weakness. So I don't think that we have immediate security risks. A consolidated Georgia that would come back to its Euro-Atlantic past does not have immediate security risk from a weakened Russia if it has its partners to support this recovery of the Euro-Atlantic past. How fast that will be, that's a different question. I think Georgia needs and will need, after this difficult period, a period of economic and social consolidation, because what we're going through now is directly affecting Georgia's economy, and that will take time to recover from this internal crisis.
So you kind of preempted my next question, but the way I like to rephrase it is by sort of going back to Georgian National Museum in Tbilisi on the Rustaveli Avenue, a real gem. On the second floor, there is an exhibition dedicated to the period of Soviet takeover and occupation and repression. It's really powerful. If you are ever in town, I would encourage you to visit. And at some point in that exhibition, there is this extraordinary quote from Noé Jordania, who was the head of government of the Democratic Republic of Georgia. It dates back to 1921. And it was a time when Georgians were trying to make the case to Western powers to basically provide Georgia with protection against the Bolsheviks. And the quote is extraordinary. I'll read it to you. What do we have to offer to the cultural treasure of European nations? The 2,000-year-old national culture, democratic system, and natural wealth. Soviet Russia offered us military alliance, which we rejected. We have taken a different path. They are heading for the east, and we for the west. We would like to yell at Russian Bolsheviks, turn to the west to make a contemporary European nation. It is extraordinary how little really has changed since 1921. Do you have a kind of, independently of politics and your sort of life in kind of Georgian politics, do you have a sort of personal theory of why this is? Why Russians would never listen to people yelling at them to, turn the country towards the west and turn it into a democracy? And are we Eastern Europeans kind of condemned to live through this experience of Russian bullying and interference and aggression over and over again?
Yeah, I think that Russia is the one country that does not know where it's a nation without borders. So if you do not know where your borders are, you're like a human being that has no skeleton. You don't. So it's an inform, and that is what is driving Russian imperialism to ever expand and to ever seek outside instead of trying to consolidate and to structure the nation inside. So they're not taking care of their own internal problems, but they're looking for the solution to their own internal problems by the eternal expansion. So that's why I think that if the only settlement that can be achieved in the end, the long-term settlement, is when Russia recognizes that it cannot occupy the territories of any of its neighbors. And that's when we start having a normal neighbor with whom you can have normal neighborly relations, which is the hope, I guess, of all the neighbors of Russia to finally be able to coexist with a normal nation, but we're not there. And it's not a question only of Putin, because even if he were succeeded by a new leader, as long as Russia has this imperialist inner aspiration, it will be the same Russia that we'll have to deal with.
Well, I hope to see that peace-loving democratic Russia at some point in my lifetime, but I think we'll have to wait. So at this point, I think we need to open it up to the audience. I already have a few questions from our online audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Please wait for the microphone. Please then introduce yourselves and try to ask your question in the form of a question rather than a statement. And let's start over there. Please.
Hello. Sorry, I can't really see you, so I'll stand. My name is Miklos Kveitaya. I'm a dual citizen who moved to the U.S. When I was quite young. Go back to Georgia every year. I love my country. I love my homeland. My question for you is, how can we, as Georgian Americans, as Georgians living in the U.S., how can we best support you? Is it through Congress, trying to get Congressman Joe Wilson to kind of grow his support in Congress? Do we come to Georgia and take part in the protests? How do you think that we can be most helpful to you and to restoring democracy in Georgia. And thank you for everything you've done. You're a true hero in our opinion.
My answer would be everything. It was very important over this Christmas, New Year period that many Georgians that are working or studying outside of Georgia really came back to take part in the protest. And it was something that really gave new energy to the people on the streets to see that they were supported actively in that sense by the Georgian diaspora. But it's also true that the importance of the Georgian diaspora, which is by now more than 1 million, which means that 1 out of 4 Georgians are in Europe or in the United States. And that is a big army that has many resources that have not been fully used until now for the popularization of Georgia, of the defense of Georgian interests. And I think that it could do much more in terms of lobbying in the Congress, yes, in the press, in the media, to present the picture of Georgia and also the economy, and look for more contacts, because we're not going to remain in this state of crisis forever, and we'll need support, we'll need development of relations. So I think that all directions are very good, including, of course, cultural relations that are very important for Georgia, because for Georgians, as you know well, culture has a very special place in their foreign policy. And
I have an online question from Levan Taktakishvili. It's a twofold question. So the first one is, what would force Ivanishvili to consent to new elections in Georgia? And the second question he's asking is, why did you not pardon former President Saakashvili, who is a political prisoner?
First one, I think that today nothing. I don't see the time for the possibility of compromise has gone. I think that the regime is too much into entering this full repression stage, which doesn't leave much chance for any form of compromise. I had offered to talk, to try to find a common position on timing and conditions of new elections. There was no answer. And the answer has been what we've seen, which is this wave of different forms of repressions that are targeting really all segments of the population, including the former prime minister. For Saakashvili, I think everybody knows my position, which I've stated many, many times, plus the fact that there was no legal possibility for pardoning without having the Georgian Dream reimpose a new sentence before the possibility of liberating him, because it takes 48 hours to liberate someone, and there were 3 sentences hanging over Saakashvili, who will get out of jail only when Georgian Dream will get out of power. That's the reality.
But how do you see that, to go back to the answer to the first question, so, but if we are in a dead end and Georgian Dream and Ivanishvili will never consent to new elections, like how does this end? Where does this go from here?
The regime will dissolve itself, because there is no regime that can continue in a small country like that without the support of its own population, isolated from the outside world, and with supports that are not real supports, because China or Iran or Russia, which today has no resources to intervene on another, are no real supporters. They are just political supporters, but that doesn't help an economy, finances, and politically the regime to uphold. And we already see the first signs of really dilution of the regime that is losing some of its supporters, and that can happen overnight as it can happen over a longer period.
Yeah, sometimes terrible repressive regimes can last
well, yes,
years,
if you want to
decades.
be pessimist, they can last decades. We do not know, but I think that the protest in this case and the civil society that is not ready to accept is sometimes stronger also.
Let's hope so. Yes, please.
Thanks. Michael Lashaw, I'm with The Insider. What's the center of gravity for this regime? The Georgian Dream Ivanishvili regime clearly does not rely on democratic legitimacy, but specifically, what are the resources they have that they are using in order to maintain power? And where do those resources come from? And if it's going to dissolve, presumably they're going to run down some sort of capital. What does that capital consist of, and where does it come from?
You mean financial capital, or?
It might be financial capital, it might be military or security services support, it could be a lot of things.
Financial capital, there is a personal capital of Mr. Ivanishvili, but he's lately not very ready to use it. So it's really the budget of the country, which will and is already suffering from the fact that the direct investments have stopped, tourism is down, and the finances will also suffer from the decisions that the central bank will take or not take. The army is something they cannot count on because the army has been loyal to our partners, has been trained, formed, has fought together with the Americans. And even if there is a top leadership that is probably politicized, that doesn't mean that the ranks and files of the army remain loyal to the pro-Western objectives that were theirs, and they have been really raised in that, and it's an institution that is very loyal and that will never turn against the population, so it cannot be used. There is, on the other side, there is no tradition of the Georgian army intervening in any form. So it will most probably remain neutral. For the law enforcement forces, there are different parts in the forces that have been used for the repression. There are the special forces, anti-riots, that are the forces that are used in different countries also, that are professional in a way, but there are new police forces that are really criminal forces that have been used. That's the Russian model, Titushky and others. Most probably they do not have enough because they have now pardoned massively 600 people, which probably are there to bring new blood to these forces. So that means that they're not sufficient. And then you have the regular police forces that are not ease with the situation as it is, because the vertical, the hierarchy in the law enforcement has changed, and the normal hierarchy has been replaced by putting everybody under the control of a criminal who is sanctioned by the United States. And that is something that is not easily acceptable by the regular police forces. So there have been defections. It's not massive. It's not clear whether it can turn to a massive, but there is clearly nervousness within the law enforcement forces. And then there is the support of the regime from the business sector. The small and medium businesses have, for the first time in Georgia, dissented and taken distance from the regime. It's not the case for the big businesses that are much more tied to the ruling party. But there, since the sanctioning of Mr. Ivanishvili at the end of December last, there are signs there too of nervousness, because if any, those are the people that understand the consequences of the sanctions. Ivanishvili himself is probably not very susceptible to be to receive this leverage on himself, but the people around who are all linked to Ivanishvili because he has shares in almost all the major businesses in Georgia. So they know that through these shares and links, they can be affected. So we see some statements, some contacts that they're trying to take, some lobbyism that they're starting, which show that there is clearly nervousness on that side.
Let's go to Nino Japaridze.
Nino Japaridze, also a proud Georgian American. A question that I have for you is this analytical construct. Georgia had a Rose Revolution, which was propelled by rigged elections at the time. If Georgia had rigged elections in last year, why are we seeing such a different reaction to public protests at the time of Rose Revolution versus now? What is so different between Shevardnadze's Georgia versus Bidzina Ivanishvili's Georgia? Why are we seeing the scenario today? What factor made that time different, where Shevardnadze went and negotiated with political opposition and decided to hold new elections? What's giving Bidzina Ivanishvili's Georgia dream the resilience or the deaf ears, depends on your perspective? What's so different today, in your opinion? Thank you so much.
I think it's because the question is, well, as I said, not only a question of rigged elections, it's a question of turning Georgia away from its course and from its partners towards Russia. And that is something that is a policy that is not a choice of anyone in Georgia. Mr. Ivanishvili doing that through his prime minister is really acting under influence of Russia. It's not a choice of anyone, including of the people that are around that I described, the business circles, or the people that are linked to the ruling parties through jobs or different privileges. Those people are linked, have vested interests in the ruling party, but they're not sharing the this pro-Russian stand. I don't think that there is any, even a minority, that has a pro-Russian stand in Georgia. In the time of Shevardnadze, it was a political, the change of ruling party that had lasted too long, and everybody knew by that time that the Shevardnadze regime was coming to an end, and it came to an end a bit earlier than the time frame that was given by the then diplomats that were observing the country. But there was no direct influence of Russia at that time.
So you spent a lot of time talking to your European colleagues. Last year, towards the end of the year, you gave a speech to the European Parliament. I have a question from Karlis Kuskevich from Ukraine Congress Committee on the current status of EU policy towards Georgia and the additional steps that you would like the EU to take to perhaps put pressure on Ivanishvili and the Georgian Dream government.
I think that the question for the European Union is a question for itself. If the European Union wants to be again strong, as America wants to be strong again, and European Union wants to forge a foreign policy and to become a foreign policy power in that part of the world, it cannot just accept that a country of 3.7 million inhabitants can just ignore all the recommendations of the European Union, can attack the European ambassadors, can have this very aggressive rhetoric, can decide to receive major European also aid financially, and then decide to turn to Russia without having instruments to be able to have a real influence. And really at this point in time, European Union should be thinking about how it can get the instruments of its foreign policy. It cannot be paralyzed by just one Hungary to take the decisions that it has to take. European Union has to reflect on how Russia is using democracy, is using elections in democratic country to, without any real cost, try to reestablish its own influence. And one has to have instruments to counter these hybrid policies of Russia. So I think that there is a lot to be done internally by the European Union to devise the new instruments of this new foreign policy.
I think there was a gentleman in the back with a question. I'm very patient.
Thank you. So thank you so much for speaking today. My name is Dan Reynolds. I am with the International Republican Institute, and my question is just about what happens next. So looking past a potential new free, fair election, Georgia is not a stranger to regimes that have fallen because of corruption. It also seems unlikely that Georgia Dream would disappear completely, or that the attitudes that at least gave them any share of the vote would be gone overnight. So what things should a new, fairly elected government prioritize to create democratic guardrails that would prevent something like this happening again?
Well, very clearly what we have in the Georgian Charter, which is based also on the European Union recommendations, what we need is a justice system. If you do not have a justice system, then you do not have protected business. You do not have confidence in investors, cannot have confidence in the future. So all of that remains very volatile. So really the cornerstone of everything is a justice system. And that's what has been really hijacked by the regime that has maintained people that were in the previous regime already, and we already had the problem of the justice system and the reform that was stopped, and then we went backwards, and that's probably the first and the most urgent priority that will determine all the rest of the development of the country. All the other institutions also are dependent of having a court system that is trusted by the population.
Before we wrap up, I think there's space for one final question, and I have made sure it's an easy one, specifically this question of the prospect for resolving the problem of Russian-occupied Abkhazia and South Ossetia. What do you? How do we fix that in 3 minutes?
I'm listening to you. No, I see the only prospect as being through the integration to the European Union. That's what the both occupied regions would see as an interest of their own. By now, they already have understood that what they could have as hopes of Russia helping them to develop their identity or their independence or their economy has never materialized. So they don't have any illusions in Russia any longer. They are not ready for a reunion with Georgia today. Georgia is not attractive for them today, but European Georgia and the prospects of cooperation with the European Union is something that can be attractive to both regions as an opening to the world after their isolation for so long.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for infusing even this hard question with a dose of optimism. I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up now. Madam President, Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us here at AI.